In the county known as the Garden of England, something extremely unappetizing has appeared. Kent, in the southeast of the country and famous for its farmland and its fruits, is becoming better known globally for a very nasty variant of COVID-19. Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. As vaccines are rolled out around the world, what do we know about the UK mutation, and what threat do it and other variants pose to the end of the pandemic? One of the first COVID-19 variants was identified in the United Kingdom last autumn, known as the Kent variant or B117. It's now been detected across Britain and in more than 50 countries. Professor Sharon Peacock, the director of the UK's Genetic Surveillance Programme, said it's going to sweep the world in all probability, possibly becoming the world's dominant strain. Analysis has found it is up to 70% more transmissible than the previous strain that was dominant in the UK. Research also suggests the Kent variant may be associated with a 30% higher risk of death, although scientists say more research needs to be done about that. There are concerns because the current vaccines were designed for earlier versions of coronavirus. Yet scientists believe that many of the vaccines in use are effective against the variants discovered to date. Most viruses change through mutation though, so how dangerous is the UK variant to health across Europe and the world? Let us welcome to this edition of Roundtable out of St Albans in the UK, Professor Jonathan Stoye, Virologist at the Francis Crick Institute. We say hello to Natasha Loder, Health Policy Editor at The Economist, and welcome back Oksana Pyzik, Global Health Advisor and Lecturer at the UCL School of Pharmacy. Great to have you all with us. Jonathan, let me come to you first of all, and this is for each one of you. Is this, the Kent variant, the British variant, more deadly than others?
I'm not clear that it is more deadly. It certainly grows faster, transmits more rapidly, and so will cause more problems than others.
And that is the danger, is it, that it gets around faster?
That's the danger.
What about vaccines? Are they useful against this one?
As far as one can make out, yes. The vaccines seem to work perfectly well against this particular variant.
Okay, and do you share the concern that this could become the dominant vaccine worldwide?
This virus has been found in, I think, 90 countries or more around the world. So yes, it is the dominant strain that we know of at the present time.
Oksana and also Natasha, but Oksana, you first of all. If it becomes the dominant world strain, what are the dangers of that? Because at least then you know what enemy you're fighting.
Certainly. Well, we did see the ramifications of that post-Christmas in the UK and just the extended public health measures that were required, specifically because although we've had great success in rolling out the vaccine, over 20 million so far, there is still many countries around the world who will potentially be without vaccines for years. And while right now the evidence shows that there is efficacy, although reduced, for this particular B117 strain, as that could evolve into yet another strain, as transmission rates rise in other parts of the world, which allows for it for more mutation opportunities to occur, we could see that perhaps that future variants are vaccine resistant.
Is it true that as...
I'd just like to
yes, please, come in.
Say that, if it's more transmissible and it's spreading around the world and countries haven't quite cottoned on to this, they're perhaps implementing policies that they've used for the wild type virus, they're going to get quite a shock moving forward. And I think that's the concern in quite a few countries around the world, is that the tools that they've used in the past may not work in the future.
And there's a very interesting study that's just come out in Canada, which predicts a major effect on the number of cases there if this virus predominates there.
Tell us a little bit more. Yeah, put the phone down, Jonathan, and tell us a little bit more about what you mean.
can't help. No, all I'm saying is that the modelers in Canada have considered the question of whether what would happen if they introduced that this variant became predominant in Canada, and there'll be an enormous spike in the number of cases. So the steps that they currently adopt to prevent transmission of the virus would not be sufficient.
Would that send us, and I don't know who this question's for really, it's for each and every one of you, would that send us back to square one?
Well, it wouldn't send UK back to square one because we're quite well prepared and we're implementing policies that have, foreseen that this variant is going to be a problem. For countries that don't take it seriously, yes, it could set them back to almost square one. I mean, the difference is that if you have vaccine, you can make an impact in that direction as well.
Oksana, let me ask you this one. This has been bothering me a little bit. If, as I've read, with each mutation, to some extent the virus becomes less destructive, why should we worry about variants at all?
Well, mutations are part of the natural viral cycle, and not all mutations that occur are going to be significant. So we did see a lot of hype about a particular strain in California, which then turned out to be not of any significance and just really sensationalized. So with each, it can move in both directions. It can become less virulent or it can become more virulent, like we have seen with the 3 current dominant strains that are in circulation in various regions of the world. And I think we need to anticipate that even with these strict public health measures, we are going to see them arise eventually within our own borders. And even if we are able to get up to 80 to 90% vaccination rate, again, there's going to be that threat if we don't address this as a global problem.
Yeah, well, I want to talk in just a moment about even if we get to 80, 90% or 95% vaccine across the UK, I want to talk about whether, in fact, if new variants come along, they are going to be able to tackle those diseases, those vaccines. But first, I want to go to the case of the Brazilian variant in the UK. 6 known cases. 5 of the people who contracted it, we know, have been traced. The hunt, as we're recording this program, still on for that 6th person. And the dangers of that. We'll talk about that in just a moment after we hear from the UK Minister for Vaccine Deployment.
This appeal is a sort of belt and braces to try and make sure we locate them as quickly as possible, because what we want to make sure we do, in the same way we're doing with the South African variant, is to rapidly surge test asymptomatic testing, as we're doing in South Gloucestershire, about to do in South Gloucestershire with the local authority, and of course gene sequence and isolate.
So the concern is that if they don't find this person, this disease is going to spread from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 and so on and so forth. How rapidly, Jonathan, could that happen?
Well, I must say I'm not as worried about this particular case as others seem to be. There are still lots of cases of the South African variant, which to my mind is very similar to the Brazilian variant floating around. We're seeing mutations occur in the Kent vaccine that would give some of the changes that might lead to differences in sensitivity to antibodies. So yes, one would like to catch it, but I'm not convinced it's the end of the world if we don't find this individual.
Okay, so you think the headlines are exaggerating it to some extent. What about the rest of you?
Well, I mean, it's a drama, isn't it, that we've all latched onto. But the fact is we don't actually sequence everybody, do we, that has cases of COVID. So there could be more cases out there that we're missing. I guess what's interesting about this is that it's one they would have hoped to have caught, and they haven't, and they've made an appeal. But remember, we're still in quite a tight lockdown, and we're still undertaking some quite sort of important policies to make sure that we keep driving our numbers down. We're doing a lot of testing, a lot of surge testing as well, a lot of contact tracing. And so, yes, it would be nice to catch every last case, But that's just not the way that this is necessarily always going to work. That's just the nature of things.
There is a little bit of nationalism creeping into this worldwide debate. You can argue whether that is a good or a bad thing, or whether it's just something that is always going to happen. So, Oksana, I want to ask you, when we talk about the fact that our sequencing in the UK is among the best in the world, A, what are we talking about? And secondly, is that true? And what advantages, if it is true, does it give us?
Yeah, so the UK is currently leading on this, but we do have a lot of blind spots across the rest of the world. So the WHO, through its Virus Evolution Working Group, which was established in June 2020, has been working with member states and countries to try and increase genomic sequencing capacity so that we have more understanding of exactly how viruses are behaving, to what extent there are viruses of significant concern, and again, ensuring that we're picking them up quickly, like we have with the Brazilian variant. And I think that case that has occurred in the UK also highlights some other policies that perhaps have not been implemented as well as it could have been. For over a year now, the UK has struggled with its test and trace system. This highlights that again, but also the leaky border policy, because again, this particular traveler was coming from a red zone and just managed to go via Paris. So again, I think this spent a lot of time debating on what would be the best policies going forward, instead of perhaps looking to other examples where we do see that we were able to get suppression of transmission of the virus, and learning from those examples and leading in that direction. But here we have a case of, again, quite a strong opposition towards perhaps not only looking after our own country, and again, we've reached this phenomenal milestone of 20 million, but we also will increase the number of variants if we don't share those vaccines. And the UK is the largest financial donor to COVAX, and COVAX is a facility that is, again, led with Gavi, CEPI, WHO, and they're coordinating the low and middle income response so that at least 20% of the population across 92 countries will get some coverage by the end of 2021. And those funds, however, are not translating into jabs and arms.
No, I do get your concerns, Oksana. Let's concentrate, if we may, on the particular variants that we're talking about at the moment. And Jonathan, this is another thing that's been interesting me. When we talk about genomic sequencing, and it's been stated that the UK just now is among the best in the world at this. Could it be that eventually we end up, because we're so good at discovering them, with a Bradford variant, a Letchworth variant, a St Albans variant, where you happen to be, a Churchill variant where I happen to be, and the whole world looks at us and thinks, crikey, the UK is riddled with all these mutations.
Well, I think that's already happened.
When in fact what we actually have is just the best database, the best library of them.
Well, we're generating these sequences faster than anybody else. If you went, for example, to some countries in Africa, they just don't have the capability of generating these sequence data. So all kinds of things might be arising there, which we have no clue about.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that the Americans are, hugely under sequencing. It's not just Africa. I think it's Europe. I think it's everywhere in the world is sequencing less than it should be. And there's been an explicit recognition in that by, the investment that's been announced by Europe and America in doing more of it.
Okay, well, why is that? Is that simply because the money's not available, or is it because they look at the UK and think the work's being done there, or they look elsewhere?
Well, no,
why
exactly.
are they not doing enough of what seems to be a very important job?
Well, Britain has always led on genome sequencing. I mean, ever since David Cameron, I think, was in power, he pushed the NHS to do a lot of clinical sequencing, and that has resulted in where we are today, where genomics is really at the heart of the NHS, certainly with certain elements of medicine. It's just something that we do, and so other countries haven't chosen to make that investment in the past. I think in the last 3 or 4 months, it's become clear how important it is to track the variants. We spent much of 2020 watching a virus, that didn't really change much at all. And then something happened. It suddenly did change in a really big way in various parts of the world.
And is that because it realized it was getting beaten by the people trying to suppress it?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I've talked to people about why it was so stable for so long and then it suddenly shifted. And one theory is that the virus found itself in someone who possibly was quite heavily immune suppressed. Maybe they had some disease. And as opposed to the virus being eradicated in that human being after a week, 2 weeks, it just remained and kept on mutating and mutating and mutating until you got a very radically new variant emerging. And that's certainly the speculation with the South Africa variant. Obviously, you have quite a immune suppressed population there with HIV, but that it may not be that at all. It may just be that you have some.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I would add one thing
Jonathan,
to that. There was a mutation that occurred in March or April of last year, this D614G, that did seem to appear simultaneously in multiple places and spread and became the predominant strain. So it's not, I don't think it's completely correct to say that the mutations have only just started happening.
Okay, so
tell me what you think.
Fair point.
Let me just jump in if I can here. Tell me what you think makes the Kent mutation so very different. Not too scientific, Jonathan, if you would, but what makes it so different from, I mean, there are countless variations out there.
I don't know whether it's the combination of mutations that make it particularly good at spreading or not, or whether it was in the right place at the right time to start spreading. I don't think it's clear what, if you analyze all the mutations that have occurred in different viruses around the world, we can point to specific changes that have effects. But we don't know what the effect of the multiple variations that occur in a given variant are on the growth of the virus.
Is it possible that this COVID-19 could mutate itself out of existence? Oksana?
Well, I'm sure that Jonathan will also want to jump in on this, but in general, coronavirus genomes are very long and they're very prone to mutations. And we, I think, would have seen at this stage that the virulence would have decreased over time if it was going to go in that direction. Now, with vaccination, we can drive it down to very low levels. And that is, I think, the goal of almost every country. However, there is also selection pressures, which means that the virus, because it has this evolutionary advantage of, if we think about humans, there have been about 15,000 generations of human beings and trillions of generations of viruses from cell to cell. So they're really well equipped to be able to do that. And with increased vaccination, it could be that we see increased selection pressure for various new variants to emerge. And I'm sure Jonathan can elaborate on that further.
Well, please do.
Well, I mean, I would also, if I want to be optimistic, point in the other direction. It is highly likely that other coronaviruses entered the human population at some time in the past. You can make theories that some of them started off being quite nasty and then with time evolved to coexist with us. So we now regard certain viruses, the common cold viruses, as innocuous or almost innocuous. But when they first entered the human population, it could easily be that they were much more dangerous. And it could be that we'll see the same thing happening with this current virus.
I think the fair answer to the question, though, is that actually we don't know. We can't say how viruses are going to evolve. It's something that's quite difficult to do. So I think the fair answer to the question is to admit that we don't know.
Okay, I suppose what I should have said instead of mutate itself out of existence is sort of get to a level where we really aren't that bothered about it anymore. But let me throw this one out there. With so many different variations, but we're talking on this program about Kent specifically, the Brazilian ones come up, we've got the South African, Nigerian, there may be many others as well. Are we going to need different vaccinations or boosters for each one of these as we learn to live with them?
Well, we don't know that either. We think that the vaccines that we have at the moment will probably suffice. But what we don't know is how these variants are going to change in the future. All the vaccine makers are preparing themselves right now for making variant vaccines, if indeed that is the case. But the companies that are working on them are treating it as a dry run. So the vaccine variants that they're working on right now are not necessarily vaccines that they're going to put into production. They want to learn how to do this quickly. And at some point, perhaps they'll see other new variants in the future. They will then pull the plug and say, yes, we'll make a variant vaccine. And by a variant vaccine, I suppose I should be a bit more specific about what I mean. What I mean is that they could offer a booster jab, which just protects against a particular variant, or they could create something called a multivalent vaccine, which is where they have a vaccine that protects against more than one strain.
Yeah, but not all of them necessarily, I suppose. It's a bit like Oksana, is it? Your vaccine becomes same person with different socks on each day. You have to change just one little thing.
Well, it really depends. We know with Pfizer and Moderna, they are working on boosters and other ways to get ahead of the variants, and that research and development of the portfolio of vaccines is incredibly important. I think it's also important to note that there are many vaccines in development, and that's fantastic progress. But with the even the efficacy that we currently have of Moderna and Pfizer, in the high 90s, it means that there is a bit of a buffer for variants that have emerged. This is why we think that the current vaccines should do a good enough job with the ones that we see right now, because that threshold, anything really would have been accepted over 50%. Especially because nearly across the board, all of our vaccines are highly effective against severe disease and hospitalizations, leading to mortality. So in the worst case scenario, it seems to be that our arsenal of tools can prevent those. The problem then becomes around mild, moderate cases and transmissibility. So again, there is lots of, I don't want to be too pessimistic about what the future variants are, but I also think it's extremely dangerous to underestimate and not prepare for the worst.
Jonathan, you and I, it would be fair to say, even though we're both still working and not in the first flushes of youth, when you talk about the human race adapting to this type of coronavirus, it's not going to be while we're still on the planet. How many years would it be? How many generations, centuries, perhaps?
Well, no, I'm not saying that we're really adapting. I'm saying we become accustomed to it, and our immune systems can respond to these things. And I would really hope that in a relatively short number of years, the evolution to coexistence, the adaptation from the virus and our immune systems will have taken place. So I worry about the next 5 years. I think beyond that, I would hope that we will coexist with this virus.
Extraordinary. So, Natasha, a year ago...
So we just have to get through the next 5 years.
Carry on.
Yes, I know. I know.
We just have to get through the next 5 years. No biggie.
And that may be more difficult for the grey hairs among us. Yes, I know.
Natasha, when it started about a year ago, and you look at where we've arrived at now, I mean, sadly, so many people have lost their lives. But are you surprised at the strides that science has made? Even though we talk about the Kent variant, we talk about the South African, are you surprised at how far we've come?
I don't want to sound like a big head, but no, I'm not surprised at all. And I predicted it about March last year. I watched the Ebola vaccine being made in 2014, 2015, and I saw how it was pushed through clinical trials in about 9 months. And so when the pandemic started, it seemed obvious to me that we would do the same thing again with COVID vaccines. That wasn't the message, I think, that many scientists were saying. They were saying it's hard, it's difficult, we might not succeed. And actually, that's fair to say. We didn't actually know that we would get a working vaccine. I suppose that's the one thing I didn't predict, that we would get so many different vaccines, but I think we were always going to get a vaccine, and it was going to happen fairly quickly. That seemed evident to me from about March of last year.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Oksana. Quick one. Oh, Jonathan, you're coming back for a later program.
In some ways, one of the triumphs of this, if you want to call it triumphs, but one of the successes has been the emergence of these RNA-based vaccines, which have now been shown to work very, very well.
Sorry, our viewers, that's the ones like the Pfizer one, the one that has to be kept awfully cold.
Yes, but it can be changed very easily. So if we do want to tweak it, that one can be tweaked very easily. And I think the same is true for the adeno-based vaccines like the AstraZeneca one. We now know that we can make vaccines that work, and there is every reason to believe that very quickly we could roll out new ones. So if more concerning variants arise, we will be able to make those very quickly.
Thank you very much, each and every one of you. I know, Natasha, you say you were optimistic a year ago, but an awful lot of people that I've spoken to on this program didn't hold the same view. We must be thankful for what we've got at the moment. Jonathan, we appreciate your time. Natasha, Oksana, great to have you on the program. And wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable, we thank you for your interest. We thank you for spending time with us, and we hope you'll do so on another occasion. From me, David Foster, for now. Goodbye.